Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Front Lines. In this episode, we are featuring three veteran artists who participated in the Worn and Transformed Uniforms as Stories of Us exhibit at the State Historical Society of Missouri in Columbia. I sat down with Drew Cameron, Martin Lazinski, and John Snyder to discuss Drew's veteran program, Combat Paper, and their individual process of healing after military service. The exhibit opening and panel discussion were presented by the State Historical Society in Missouri and Missouri Historic Costume and Textile Collection at Mizzou. It was also sponsored by Mizzou College of Arts and Science, Missouri Arts Council, and Missouri Humanities. Worn and Transformed will be on view until August 15th, 2026. This podcast episode is sponsored by the Veterans United Foundation and Missouri Arts Council. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to start out with actually having Martin read one of his poems from his book titled Combat Paper, and then we're going to go from there.
I'm just going to do a little test here for the mic. How's it? Oh, yeah, that helps, doesn't it?
I can hold it if you want.
Maybe since I'm going to be flipping pages and I got old fingers. Does that always sound good? Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Combat Paper. In uniform, you become a cipher. Singularity forfeited for unity. Conformity molding a unit. Quirks and ornament to unified action. Post-deployment, your uniform recycled, utility reduced to fiber molded into paper, into this blank page, touching it, rubbing it, reaching for traces of where you've been, your sweat, perhaps your blood. Listen for the echoes of your hopes and dreams, your fears, your overwhelm, your boredom. This paper, its history, its past life mute. This paper, beaming the potential of the blank page. This paper, awaiting tales of the new life embraced, explored. Compost your baggage into nutrients. Reset your course by unfamiliar stars. Strive for reconciliation, for gentleness and generosity, the untasted flavors of laughter and of love. This paper, with a front and a back, evoking the outside and inside of the uniforms from which it's made. What is the demarcation of outside actions and what of this demarcation of outside actions and interior self? Fertile soil for confusion, for disjunction, for conflict, for days riding the pendulum of anger and numbness, nights a replay of alarm and loss. How clean the self now standing naked without the uniform. Camouflage removed. Standing naked, bare naked. A clean body, a smile. Yet what failed to scrub clean? Launder the uniform, soap and shower the body, yet cogs remain in the mechanism of self. The very uniform you wore into action pulped into this blank page. As you from conscription through enlistment now standing naked before your future. Yet as this paper has fibers, possesses textures, what you remain, having been molded, assaulted, discharged, but not into peace. I run my fingers across this paper, yet wish they could massage your soul. I do not see your face in memory, yet I see the faces of others I have known, and I look over their shoulders. And if I look over their shoulders, I see a line of faces stretching into antiquity. Were they able to pulp their uniforms into paper, into a clean page on which to write bright futures across the relentless momentum of conscription, transformation, and discharge? The places we can't scrub clean remain unknown to others. and our voices never rise above the hubris of war. That drumbeat of those who do not know, who do not risk. The march to sacrifice, if not of self, then at least, the march to sacrifice, if not of life, then at least of self. The places no one else will ever see. What gravitational forces propel your reshaping of self, your steps into possibility, into unrecognized wants and needs? Struggle has skinned my touch in roughness, yet not ebbed my sensitivity to your tale. Your struggle to recognize and actualize that which is right. We hold this paper, what was once worn into battle, now a blank page, silent about self, open. Thank you. I apologize there if I was stumbling.
So Martin, how long after attending Drew's combat paper workshop did you write that piece?
I'm not sure. It was when I'd begun working on the book. I was giving a public reading with some other veterans of our poetry for an event associated with the trench poets of the First World War, remarkable writers. He was in the back of the auditorium with a display of his paper. And I was driving home with Barbara, my wife, afterwards, and I said, I should print my poems on that paper, you know. And then I said, oh, yeah, my paper. Well, I got to put them together now, and we got to make a book, you know. And then it all evolved from that. And so I forget at which point I actually went and took the workshop with Drew, you know, to actually learn the process itself. It's a long way of answering.
That's perfect. And when you started writing poetry and started writing about your experience in Vietnam, why did you pick poetry instead of nonfiction or fiction?
Because it all started, I had 2 lines in my head. They had been bouncing around for a while, and I hadn't written in a while. And they turned out to be, excuse me a minute, let me grab this. And they were more pages. 1 minute. Here we go. I had these 2 lines in my head for quite a while, and it was, I've had my fingers in the wounded. Their desperateness has taken my hand. And that just came. I was away on a retreat, and it just stayed with me. And that's in the poem "A Veteran's Tale" early in the book. Those 2 lines are next to the last 2. If you don't mind, I'll just read it real quick. I've had my fingers in the wounded. Their desperateness has taken my hand. Now I sleep nights beside my beloved, never parting skin to skin. And then they just started flowing. I'm sorry. And then they just started flowing, you know. And the way it happened was I wouldn't necessarily set aside a time to write the poetry, but I would wait till I started getting lines in my head. And once I started getting the lines in my head, I would sit and write, and I would just write until whatever was there had come out, you know. And that was my first really rough draft, and take it from there. So that was the process of how the poems came out. And it occurred to me that very many people had written about the war itself. You know, many veterans of very many wars had written about that, but no one had really talked that much directly about reentry, or particularly the healing of a wounded, physically or psychologically. And so I kind of zeroed in on that aspect. That was from my unique experience of coming back, medevac back, and having a long rehab, and then eventually later um, PTSD therapy. When that came about, I thought that was a side that hadn't been explored, and quite frankly, I didn't want to go back into any of the blood and guts stuff.
But do you think that you needed to fully heal from your time in the service
I think I fully
to go to the blood and guts stuff?
Oh, I went to the blood and guts stuff in my healing.
Yeah, but do you think it was necessary for you to fully
Well,
heal?
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because I'm one of that 22-23% from every war that comes back with however they label it for that war, PTSD, and is that's emotion, that's nightmare, that kind of stuff, and so it's there, and what you do is you start poking at it and biting off little chunks.
Drew, hearing that poem about combat paper and all these years that you've worked with veterans and the different veterans through this program, what does it feel like to hear that poem from Martin and being a part of his healing experience?
Yeah, I was really struck with Martin's poem with this idea of potential. So, sort of meditating on this idea of the blank page and the potential of what it can become, much in the same way as we can in our own lives redefine what our purpose is after military, after war. And so I love the perfectly put poetics of the paper being this blank page that we then can decide to choose how to activate in whichever way we find most relevant. So I like hearing how people interpret the work, right? It's paper making, much like a workshop in poetry or creative writing, is generative, right? Just being around other people in that creative space helps us be more creative. And so it's very affirming to see that because I was not involved in that writing or anything. Yeah, it's great for me.
Awesome. And so, what made you pick paper making as your medium to work on and then work with veterans? What drew you to that? Was it a singular moment or was it a process?
Happenstance. It's sort of like what made you choose the army or what made you choose the field artillery? Was it a choice? I don't know. But yeah, I think so. Paper making is this beautiful craft in that it is a commodity. It's a simple process. It's elegant, but it also has this beautiful story of fine art application. And so my interest as a creative person and one who likes to build things kind of merge perfectly with the craft of paper making. And then, of course, we're using our uniforms and we're cutting them up and we're ripping them apart and we're pulping them down to their base fibers and then recreating them into something new, right? They're not destroyed, they're dismantled, right? They're changed.
Yeah, and so I did some research and watched some of the documentaries that and a lot of the veterans talked about the process of breaking down the uniform and making something new. Why do you think that's so important to them?
I mean, it would be nice if we had some type of rite of passage for reentry. And so a lot of us have to find it on our own. And I think a creative practice or paper making, when presented, can really become that thing. Yeah, and it's, again, because it's elegant, anybody can participate without having much training at all, right? One doesn't need to be an art practitioner to make paper, right? And so it's approachable, I think that. And then also the idea that good conversation and connection can occur through the process of making something with other people. But the idea of breaking down, I like that, both as you're symbolically breaking down this material and not necessarily defining all of the steps of what they mean, but they can become these sort of nonverbal actions that later can become, again, like a metaphor or the poetics of how I am changing my own life, post-military. Yeah, so it's really effective in these ways. Yeah.
I like that idea of providing that in the transition period. What was your transition period? I know what mine was like in the Marine Corps. I'm curious what yours was like compared maybe to Martin and John's transitioning
Out of the Army, you mean?
out of the Army. Yes.
So I graduated college. I left the Army and I went into school like a lot of us do, as my intention originally was. And I tried to kind of at first pretend that I was never in the Army, like I wouldn't tell anybody. And that, kind of scratched away pretty quick. But as soon as I met other veterans, it was on, right? Because I felt as though I wasn't the only one who had just gone through this. I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I wasn't shameful around, the culture back home was that everyone knew, the word was out that the war was illegal, right? That it was wrong. And so I didn't really want to be implicated in that, right? So I tried to hide from it at first. But by meeting other veterans, it gave me I became empowered to find my own voice. And so I feel lucky in that way. There was a community that developed that I found that helped support each other. Yeah, as we were trying to figure out what to do next.
That camaraderie that you kind of had in the military.
More so, I would say.
More so. Okay. Awesome.
Absolutely.
John, and so what was your experience? You probably most recently attended a workshop out of the panelists out of Martin. What was that experience like? Your piece is the tanks, the origami tanks in the exhibit. Why did you pick that?
Well, because I had worked with those origami forms before, and I was just using older newspapers, and well, I was reminded of some of Drew's imagery in there of Ferguson and other wars that another imagery that he took from newspapers. So I was folding up New York Times because there was always stories about conflicts all around the world all the time. So I had great ways of or easy access to all the types of paper to it. But since it was mass produced, it didn't have that kind of that shell that it came from, that it wrapped around first and then came off. So whenever I was in the workshop, I felt like I was ripping that Band-Aid up and just tearing it up, and I probably had the most fun in our little workshop, just grabbing the uniforms and just going to town and just ripping them up. I kind of wish we would have had a class like that, like a combat paper making class for people, but optional after we transition out of the Marines or whatever you're in the service. To me, it came out that if you just want to get rid of all that, it'd be, catharsis. You could go through and just grab your uniforms and rip them up, and you can actually make something out of it. You could make paper and then have, put your resume on it for when you go out into the world. And got to find out, well, all right, what am I going to do next? Because they have all those other classes. I forget what they're called, but yeah, that didn't really prepare me for, just taking a uniform off was just the one part. It was the easy part. You just take the uniform off and well, I guess you had to figure out what to wear after that, but yeah, you take the uniform off and then you're like, all right, what am I going to do with this now? And it's sitting in the closet for a long time. Some people have them on display in their houses, but most of the time people just have them back in there and they just kind of want to move on with their lives. But when I'm into this guy in combat paper workshops and meeting Martin and yourself, I realize there's a lot more that we could probably say with this. And there's a lot of other veterans out there that probably would see this as an opportunity to finally, release some, inner demons, I guess, or thoughts that you have that you just want to get rid of and just move on with.
Yeah, because I think, do you think we hold on to some of those feelings because we think that other people won't understand because they haven't been there? And then once you do tell your story, do you think that your idea of that changes?
Yeah, it kind of takes it from the inside of your head and puts it out. And then once you kind of do that, you're kind of like speaking, like Bruce Lee said, the power of words. That's why they call it making spells, because whenever you're spelling, you're saying things out, you're kind of getting them out of your system. That's the way I feel.
Martin, so the book that we have on display, that's made out of the combat paper, can you tell us the story behind the cover, and then
Yeah.
being your friend's uniform?
Yeah, I, I made I've made five books total, and this one Drew not only contributed to paper, but he also very generously donated the camo uniform for that book. And so I had a bunch of poems, and I had to put them together. I had to make a book out of it, um, and then the thought came, what does a book have? Book has I need a cover for this, and I thought, well, what does a cover do? A cover protects the text, protects the pages, the inside. It's a protection of that. And then that led me to think of um, um, body armor, and how the body armor protects um, the soldier, inside that body armor, the words inside the covers of a book. And then I thought, well, what better material to make a cover out of than Kevlar? And so then I began to learn a hell of a lot more about Kevlar than I ever thought I would, which is one of the things. And among my findings was technically Kevlar comes in two forms. It comes in plates and it comes in sheets. Okay, and the sheet is like a fabric sheet. And so in contemporary body armor, the plates are used in the front and back, and actually the side panels are layered sheets of Kevlar. Okay, so then I took the sheets of Kevlar to go something, but the Kevlar sheets of Kevlar, they only come in one color, and it's this very like bright neon yellow, and I just didn't think that was quite going to go with combat paper, the color of combat paper. And then I had to scratch my head for a while, and then I had to give up my ego and let, so some insight could come in. And eventually, somehow I got around to thinking of fatigue, the fatigues in the cloth, and adding another textural element to the book, because combat paper is very rich in texture. And so then I got the fabric to add another texture, and increase that vocabulary in the book. And then once I got that together, to make the front and back out of the Kevlar wrapped in the camo, I had to figure out how to bind it. And so I'd taken a course in different hand stitching techniques in a workshop, and I recalled this method called Japanese stitching, and I thought that would be perfect for the book. That's the method of stitching I used. It's called Japanese stitching. But I decided I wanted to make the book as tight as I could, conceptually and also material. And so that's when I had the thought of using medical sutures for the stitching material, the same material that the doctors used in their attempts to make us whole after we had been wounded. To kind of just hold everything, bring it all back together. And so that's kind of how the cover and the book itself evolved. And the book that's here is very dear to my heart because it's a camo fatigue jacket, duty jacket, from a very dear friend of mine, Daniel Mercado. 16 years in the Marine Corps, 2 enlistment periods. First, he went to Bosnia, and the second, he went to Iraq. And so I'm getting a little chills right now So that's Daniel. I mean, or whatever veteran I get to use that voice. And so this one's, and I met Daniel in PTSD, a multi-generation PTSD group, Vietnam vets and Iraqi Afghans.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
Martin, you reminded me of something. First, I wanted to say, Martin and Barbara came all the way from California to be here today. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that great? We love California and Missouri, don't we? Yes, we do. And in Iowa. But you reminded me, I wanted to say this as sort of anecdote. So I started combat paper in 2007, right? I was in the war in Iraq in 2003. And for me, I started making this paper and it was about the Iraq war, right? And as soon as we started doing public workshops, Vietnam veterans started showing up and World War II veterans started showing up. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be the rest of my life, right? Because the wars always come home. And sometimes, I mean, it's still relevant today for a Vietnam era veteran to participate in combat paper. And I find that really, for me, it was not shocking, but it was sort of something I had to sit with and swallow, that was going to be, that was happening, that this work was relevant for all of us. Yeah. And then I also want to say the uniforms too, you reminded me. So it's, as an Iraq war veteran, getting to know Vietnam era veterans, a lot of questions I have for folks who lived through that was like, what did you do afterwards? Like, how did you come home? What was your job? All that kind of stuff. And figuring out, trying to glean insight, like how can we take what you learned and move forward? So in creative practice as well, we've really looked to the previous generation to inform how we can, kind of stand on your shoulders and keep carrying that forward. That's definitely been the case for a lot of me and my cohort, for sure. And all the uniforms that we make into paper come from people donating them. So every single fiber of uniform made into paper has that intention intact. That's important to me. So when he approached me, it's impossible for me to say no to a Vietnam vet, right? Hey, Drew, will you make a bunch of paper for my book? Yes. Can you make it specifically out of the uniform from the Vietnam War? Yes. I had like 3, yes, I can. So it's the OG 107 uniform type, olive green 107. So I proudly pulped them all, and then the paper, and as you know, he bound into the book. So I just wanted to add that anecdote as you reminded me of that. Thanks, Martin.
What were the go ahead, yeah.
And I just had a thought that you remind me of. One other thought on the camo. We've all seen camo today. All the branches of the service have their own camo colors and patterns, So, but I didn't want to restrict the audience of the book in any way. I wanted all veterans to see themselves in it for what they could learn about themselves. And so the camo pattern that I chose is the last uniform pattern that was worn by all the branches. So that's the last, worn by, and fortunately, he's such a great supplier.
Uniform repository.
He is, and he rose to the occasion. Yeah, so that was just another element we were trying to make it all tight.
I was going to ask you, Drew, working with the Vietnam veterans and gone to Iraq yourself. What did you learn from them, or what do you wish that we would have learned between Vietnam and Iraq for yourself?
Don't send us to Iraq.
Yeah, really.
I wish we would have learned that. Yeah, personally, I mean, that's where I stand. That's my experience, and I'll go to the grave feeling that way. But for those of us who came back and felt a little bit disenchanted, that you're not alone. There's other people who can channel that in ways that are not destructive. Destruction of self is certainly one of the plights of the American veteran, as we all know, certainly. But there's another way to kind of recalculate some type of purpose moving forward. And there are a lot of Vietnam era veterans who've done amazing things, carrying the identity of veteran along the way, and some do amazing things but don't really necessarily mention their veteranness. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that I learned is you could be proud even though you may feel a little bit, a complicated way about your experience. You know, you can still feel as though what you did had honor and that you served and you did your part when you were called upon, and these kind of components that were given to make sense of it. But that there's also a lot of ways to, I'm struggling to find the right word or phrase, but I would say push back, you know, to find your voice and to be empowered to have a perspective and to share it, right? To not just be silent about it, but to really, organize and find other veterans and work to make sense of it in a way so that we don't send our children or grandchildren to another folly.
Did you want to add something to that, Martin?
Please.
You're like, I don't know.
Maybe I shouldn't. I'll go outside. Anyway, I'll just say it. Drew, I thought we learned that lesson after Vietnam.
Right.
That we'd never do that again. And then we did. For a lot of us Vietnam vets, I could just repeat what I've heard. It really broke our hearts. It really broke our hearts. And so I don't know. You know, I just wish 3 times the charm, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, no, you're fine. So yeah, I just wanted. I think we have a few more minutes before we need to do Q&A. From any of you, I mean, what's something you would tell a veteran today who maybe they're struggling right now, and they're looking for that purpose? I mean, what would your message be to them?
I would say, quickly get yourself to a vet center. That's where I did all my heavy lifting.
Explain to folks who don't know what a vet center.
Vet center was created by the Veterans Administration in the early '80s when they finally diagnosed PTSD. And the problem they were having was the Vietnam veterans were not coming in to the VA for treatment. We wouldn't go near it. And it was the old VA back then compared to the current VA. Also, much different. So they wouldn't come in. And so what they did, they created this thing called Vet Center. And they were really storefronts in the community, and they were staffed by veterans. And so that's what brought a lot of us in for healing, access to that. And in the process over time, at the vet centers and at the VA, they really got a handle on PTSD and came up with tools for dealing with it. And so I say, get yourself to a vet center. They'll teach you some tools, and you can have more peace find peace in your life.
You know, you see it on the back of T-shirts. You are not alone. I mean, it's cliche, but it's accurate. I also had the vet center experience. I didn't do anything for 8 years, and then I finally started going to vet center, and it was a very positive thing for me. That's been my experience. I also say that there's a huge climate. Part of it, my theory, is that after the Vietnam War, there was sort of like a political cleansing and a cultural sort of unacknowledgement to the mass amount of returning veterans. It's very different from today, and I think in part we're trying to make up for that. We as a society make up for that. So there are a lot of nonprofits and non-governmental organizations that are veteran-based, veteran-run, that are doing fascinating stuff, like training people how to farm or supporting them in creative practice. I mean, I would also say that going to college, I went to community college first and transferred to university, and that had a huge impact on my understanding of what I had gone through by accessing the words and stories of those who had come before me, right? Making that connection that I was part of this continuum. But going it alone, it never works, it never has, and it won't work. So that would be my advice.
John?
My advice would just to be start using your hands, your brain, to start making something. The veterans are out there struggling, just start first giving you something to do, and then when you start creating, you start getting more confidence in what you're doing and making, then you start to build that confidence back up. You start to build a you self, not a we self that you were before. Yeah, just get your hand, just doing anything. Grab a chainsaw, start making chainsaw wood sculptures. I don't know, do something. Just make anything. Make little itty bitty miniature portraits of presidents or something. I don't. Who knows? Who knows?
Hello, friends of Missouri Humanities. Whether you're a first-time listener or you've been with us before, thank you for tuning in. We love being able to share these stories with you. Missouri Humanities relies on the feedback and support of program attendees, film viewers, and podcast listeners like you to keep these initiatives alive into the future. If you find yourself enjoying this podcast and other Missouri Humanities offerings, we hope you'll consider a donation in any amount. All donations benefit humanities programs and grant funding for Missourians and Missouri organizations, which would be impossible without people like you. To donate today, visit mohumanities.org.